Good evening. Welcome to tonight's program. My name is George Lavery. My favorite position is upper right corner, and that's where you'll find me on the screen. It is my pleasure as a member of the Southern York County Rotary Club and as a longtime board member of the Paul Smith Library of Southern York County to be the moderator and host and to welcome you to tonight's program. This is the third year that we have done a Human Rights Day discussion panel, and I'm very pleased to welcome you and I introduce tonight's panelists. Let me introduce, first of all, Amy Evans, who is Project Director of CARD, or Community Action for Recovery and Diversion. And in this role, Amy is working to collaboratively transform justice, health, and human services systems to ensure people are connected to behavioral health care as quickly as possible. Excuse me, especially those especially those who are or may become justice involved. Previously, Amy worked with the York County Reentry Coalition to lower barriers to successful reentry through greater access to healthcare, transportation, housing, and employment opportunities. She began as project director for CARD in January of 2020. Kblechertas is on our panel, and she is program coordinator with the York County Coalition on Homelessness. Driven by a passion for helping people and service providers, she takes pride in providing the best collaboration opportunities possible in York County to help both service organizations and residents of the county achieve their goals of stable housing for all. Our third panel member is Robin.shearer, and she is the executive director and co-founder of Friends and Neighbors of Pennsylvania Incorporated, and oversees the day-to-day operations of the organization. Robin has served communities in various roles, including domestic violence, sexual assault crisis intervention, director of youth ministries, coordinated street outreach, and volunteer coordinator for various organizations. Robin has also held volunteer positions with Habitat for Humanity and other organizations. She previously served as a board member for Children's Aid Society and Salt and Light Youth Ministry. Robin is currently serving as a member on the board of the BEAST Initiative. Our topic is homelessness in York County. And if you have questions during or immediately following topics as they're discussed, you really have two options. You can use chat, or you can wait until it's opened up for questions and answers, which will be later on in the program. So with that, let me have our panelists get underway.
Hi, thank you, George. Again, I'm Amy. I think that our names are on the screen in the order that we're seated. If you are needing to refer to that to remember who is who. We've kind of designed tonight's session to be a conversation between Kelly and Robin and myself. So we're going to flow back and forth and cover a variety of topics. And I wanted to start just by asking everyone that's on the call this evening to take a moment. And if I say a homeless person, like just take a minute and see what image that brings to mind. I'm sure that, something instantly kind of appears to you. And maybe it's someone that you saw sleeping on a bench recently, or maybe you're thinking about someone who is at an interchange or a stop sign holding a cardboard sign. And the point of doing this is just to recognize that we all have preconceived notions about homelessness and what that is and what that looks like. And by the end of our session tonight, I think you'll be able to have a much more accurate picture of what, especially locally, that looks like. So I'm going to start off by asking Robin what her experience of a typical homeless person is.
Well, first of all, I have cold, so my voice is gonna sound a little interesting this evening. As you can guess, there's really not a typical homeless person. It's just, I know, like you said, you're challenging people to what do they see in their mind, but there's really no typical homeless person in that slide.
We're going to share a little graphic with you here that is a great way to look at what we do with our homeless populations. And you'll see on the side it says, if only the homeless problem was about being homeless. And you'll see there's drug addiction, there's PTSD, there's mental illness, domestic violence, cuts in assistance, income inequality, LGBTQ family rejection, alcoholism, student debt, and that probably just barely scratches the surface.
True, very true. So I know for what we're seeing right now in and around York is really what Kelly just read to you.
So the other thing we think about a lot of times when you talk to someone and they say, oh, well, there's someone who's homeless, they're staying on a bench, or I've seen them holding a sign, there is a preconceived notion that people that experience homelessness have been experiencing homelessness for a very long time. We assume that this is a state in which this person has existed in for a long time. They have developed strategies to cope with this situation. But in reality, there are a variety of different lengths of time that people who are homeless experience. You have, especially now at this point in the pandemic, a lot of people who have never been homeless before. There is a harsh reality that a lot of us don't want to necessarily spend too much time thinking about, that none of us are all that far away from homelessness. We are a bad situation, a health condition, or a legal issue, anything could impact our housing stability and our ability to take care of ourselves, to take care of our housing. So what we're seeing now is there is a large increase in people who have never been homeless before. They're homeless for the first time. They don't know the service system. They don't know what's available. They don't know what's out there, and it's scary. Being homeless is traumatic, and we have to remember that as we consider kind of the populations we work with. There are people who have what we kind of refer to as periodic homelessness. These are people that maybe they've been housed, but it is a precarious situation. Maybe their income is such that they are just on the edge of being able to afford that housing. Something comes up and they can no longer afford to stay. Maybe it's a health condition, as I mentioned before, that means they can no longer maintain their housing. Maybe they've had a relationship fall apart, whether it's a romantic relationship or a roommate or a family member, and now they no longer have a place to live. So there are people that have experienced homelessness and have been housed, but struggle to stay in that housing. So they know what homelessness is like, that they have been housed, and now they're struggling again with a homeless situation. And then we do have what we refer to as chronic. These are the folks that we inherently think of, people that have struggled to achieve housing, stable housing, and have continued to bounce in and out of staying with people they know, or in and out of shelters, or even outdoors for a long period of time. So when we think about homelessness, not only does homelessness look like different groups, it looks like families with children, it looks like couples, it looks like single individuals, it looks like generations of families that are together. But it also looks like different time periods that they've been experiencing that homelessness. So, Robin, what does it mean to be homeless? We're saying that word, what does that mean?
Right. For me, a lot of times we talk about people that are unsheltered, and that can be a place that's not meant for human habitation, prison, emergency shelter. A lot of families will pull up. Since the pandemic, we've even seen that more. Well, families tripling and quadrupling up. I'm tossed in even people that are in a hotel.
Yeah.
Because that can be definitely sporadic. Sometimes if there's an event and hotels are limited, they might get it for a while and then not be able to go in. So that's That's my
Yes.
definition.
Yes. And to some extent, geography matters too. Are we talking about people that are experiencing homelessness near a metro center? So in York County, our metro centers are Hanover and York City. So are they close to those resources? That is typically where you will find things like emergency shelter. You'll find dedicated meal programs that occur pretty regularly each day. You'll find service providers, healthcare, behavioral health services near those centers. So are we talking about someone who is experiencing homelessness near one of those centers? That looks different than someone who is experiencing homelessness in a suburban or in a rural area. In a suburban area, you might be outdoors. You might be what we call doubled up, which is just our term, I guess you could say, for when you're staying with someone, but you're not a roommate, you're not on the lease, you're not on the mortgage, you're just staying there because you have nowhere to go. So you see that more in your suburban areas. You see it in your rural areas too. And again, you see more outdoors, camp style living in rural areas because there just aren't the shelter services, there just aren't those opportunities in those more rural spaces. You also see a lot more people, as Robin said, staying in hotels. So they may have limited income, but they're putting what income they do have towards hotel stays so that they're indoors. You know, they are indoors, they're safe, they have access to bathrooms and showers, and they will stay as long as they can, as long as their money is available to them. And then they may be outdoors, or they may be staying with someone. And then when they're able to access funds again, they may be back in a hotel. So there are a wide variety of people that are experiencing homelessness. It is not just those that are outdoors, staying on a bench, those types of things. And there are, I mentioned briefly how many challenges there are when you're experiencing homelessness in those rural and even suburban settings. You don't have the access, the walkable access to services that you do have when you're closer to an urban center. And that makes it harder for not only you to access services, but also harder for you to have a safe place indoors to stay, unless you're staying in a hotel that's in the local area. And there are even quite a few places in York County where there aren't a lot of hotels available either. So those are different challenges than our populations that stay close to the urban centers. What I will say is that we do in York County have partners, and we'll touch on this later on, but I just want to say quickly that we do have partners in our more rural areas in York County that do a remarkable job. They are not homeless service dedicated partners. They are more broad than that. They are community service partners, but they assist our homeless populations in those areas just like they assist those that are housed. So when we talk about Southern York County, we talk about Southern Community Services in Shrewsbury, we talk about Mason-Dixon Community Services in Delta. Community Reach does phenomenal work in the Red Lion area. And in Northern York County, we have New Hope Ministries. They serve the Dillsburg area, the Dover area. They're also in Hanover, but they really branch out from those areas in Northern York County to make sure that people can access the services that they need.
I'm going to stop the screen share, I think, so we can see the chat and everyone can see us again. And I wanted to note that I've worked in downtown York for 15 or 16 years at this point. And I also did work a year from home, pretty much March of 2020 to March of 2021. And Robin, one thing that I just noticed personally is that, you know, obviously I didn't have any observations for most of 2020, but just from 2019 to 21, it seems like there's a lot more visible people, you know, on the street in downtown New York City. And I mean, is my perception of that accurate? And if it is, what's behind that?
Absolutely accurate. We're definitely seeing an increase from the end of May to almost the end of June. Our team, we had 286 touches, so interactions with people. Kelly and I spoke at an event, and I took numbers from November 18th to November 30th, and just in that time period, we had 324. So we are seeing more people. I know starting probably in July, we started to get a lot of calls from businesses. Why are we seeing more people? Well, we're seeing more people because there are more people on the street. Shelters are at capacity. People, eviction, the capacity, everybody's capacity. No one has anywhere to go. So right now, Kelly mentioned there's the rural areas, we have people that walk from Emmetsville to the city for services. Services are. So we're seeing that in a big way. And we're also seeing there's a lot of cases where people are just on bridges, in and out, wherever someone can find a place to be. And so that is definitely absolutely true. Unfortunately, now it's getting colder. And so it's making things it's increasing the need. It really is.
And I would say that, to be perfectly honest, we were seeing an increase before the pandemic started. So we were starting to see an increase in January of 2020. And I think, in the sphere that I work in with the Coalition on Homelessness, we took a step back and said, what's happening that we're seeing this increase? But before we could really get anywhere, everything shut down. Everything shut down at the beginning of March. And we all pivoted to panic mode on trying to provide services to as many people as possible when most people were working from home. And buildings were shuttered and there were no restaurants open and there was no access. Getting some feedback on the panelist end. I think it might be our air conditioning system. It probably is the air conditioning system. It might be out of our control. I hope it's bearable. Sounds like wind. It isn't. We have a vent right above us, so I apologize for that. I'm hoping it'll turn off soon. I'll go adjust the thermostat in hopes that helps. I will talk while she's gone. So we were seeing this increase before the pandemic started, but I think it is important to note, because we've been in this for so long now, that we have some COVID dynamics that have absolutely made that more challenging and has made us see people on the street. We saw for a period of time a huge increase in federal support, not only for programs that were helping people financially. We were seeing a lot of money come in for programming, but we were also seeing people getting increased unemployment benefits. We were seeing people get stimulus checks. 3 of them, I think there were 3 stimulus checks. So those dynamics allowed people to access more money. And we actually saw a huge drop in the number of people looking for assistance in 2020. I'm going to say from April to October, it was crickets. There were very few people looking for shelter. There were very few people looking for services or help moving into permanent housing, rental units. People were doubled up, staying with people to stay safe. They had income that they wouldn't have normally had, and they were using that income to stay in hotels or to stay with someone and pay rent while they were there. So we were seeing less people initially. However, all of that was time limited. So once that increased support ended, we saw our numbers jump just drastically. When people no longer had increased unemployment, they had no longer had increased stimulus checks coming in, and quite frankly, a lot of their friends and family were tired of them being in their homes. Then we saw people looking for support from the homeless crisis response system, from shelters, from housing providers, from rental assistance providers, case management. However, and Robin alluded to this, there is only so much capacity. And the biggest thing that the homeless system has learned in all of this is that money is great and money lets you help more people, but you can't help more people if you don't have more helpers. So where we are seeing lower staff, like most sectors are, there are less people to assist people in getting into housing.
So that has been a challenge for us, and it's resulted in things like this week, which is a really great example. So this week, it snowed yesterday. Maybe you saw the snow. It wasn't a lot of snow, but you don't ever know that until it really snows, right? Because the weathermen, you know, it's hit or miss. So sometimes it's flurries, sometimes you get 6 inches, you just never know. So we knew there was snow coming. And so we were trying to prepare for space indoors for people to come in for cold weather. So unfortunately, our cold weather beds at one of our shelters in the community, Life Path Christian Ministries, were unavailable all week because they were adhering to their COVID protocols. They were adhering to quarantine, which meant they were not able to take in anyone else who needed a space when it was very cold out at night. In addition to that, we have a cold weather shelter that opened last winter, is trying to open again this winter in the city, but we're unable to hire staff. So if there's no staff, we can't open. There's no one to maintain operations. So this week, and you know, it's been cold. A few of these nights have been really cold. There is no cold weather shelter. There is normal year-round shelter. So if you were already in a bed, you're okay. But if you were outside and needed to come in because it's cold at night right now, we don't have it. Some of that is the COVID capacity. We can't have people as close together. We have less beds available in our shelters. Some of it is our staffing. Some of it is just quarantine and isolation protocols. So it is a very volatile time for emergency shelter. There was a normal time when we would take it as many people in as we could, because that meant people could get out of the cold. You can't do that in a pandemic COVID world. So we are really faced with a lot of challenges around shelter capacity, around winter weather, and what we're able to provide.
And I'm gonna take into that and because of that, you ask more people on the street. Well, during that time period, our team then provided gear for people. So we provided gear for 25 people because they needed to stay warm.
So that was 25 people
Right.
that Friends and Neighbors Street Outreach had to make sure had survival gear. Can you stay warm? Do you have a place to get out of the wind? Can you stay dry? So that's the response we can provide. Is it the response we want to be able to provide? No, but we're trying to keep people safe in any way that we can. So some more discussion, I think, is relevant around, we talk a lot about how homeless populations interact with different systems, right? So there is a preconception that homeless people are often involved in the criminal justice system, right? So we think, oh, well, there must be a reason they're homeless. You know, have they done something within the legal system that means that they're homeless? So I'm hoping that Amy can talk a little bit about what leads to justice involvement for homeless individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to cover a couple different parts to this piece of the puzzle. And I'm going to start by saying that, first of all, you know, a homeless person could choose to commit any type of crime, you know, in exactly the same way that someone with a house would. You know, there is no magical separation between those two populations in terms of criminal intent. But there is a lot of context around being homeless that means that just by dint of existing and not having a home, you know, that someone may become involved in the criminal justice system. Some examples of that are very common are people who, especially in cold weather, you know, they may be hanging out in a place of business, or they may just be hanging out in a sheltered spot on the street, but they have been there for too long and have caught the attention of someone who has called law enforcement. And then they're looking at possibly trespassing or loitering, especially if they don't want to give up the warm spot. And that's understandable from one perspective, but it's also understandable that they do need to probably be somewhere else, especially if they are in a place of business. And sometimes the justice system is left seeing like, well, the only tool that we have in our toolbox for this is an arrest. So that's that's a piece of the puzzle where very low level charges can emerge from an activity that really doesn't, immediately or even, kind of in the interim threaten anyone's safety. There's another level, there's a set of mid-level charges, activities that might not be ideal or might not be what someone wants to see, when they're walking down the street. But it's still not a threat to people's safety, and those are activities like panhandling. It may be someone relieving themselves in public because they simply don't have anywhere else to do it. Sometimes it could be an open container or someone, they're not acting up per se, but they are intoxicated in public. And, sometimes observers see that and see it going to a place. It's not there yet, but they see it heading that way and they want to nip it in the bud and call in law enforcement again. And then there are, there are charges that can result from that as well. And then there are a realm of activities that do need a response. There can be threats to public safety. We're certainly not saying that never happens. These activities are often, when you see them on a charge sheet, are drunken disorderly conduct. If people are being accosted somewhat aggressively or fighting with each other, there are terroristic threats or other charges that can stem from that are more serious. The challenge for the justice system in particular is knowing what kind of response to apply to each situation. Is law enforcement truly needed for all of those examples? Some of them, yes, absolutely. A lot of them, maybe it's better if we were to engage with services. Maybe people should call Robin or similar service providers to drive a resolution that is a win-win for everyone in the situation, instead of just kind of, we don't see the homeless person anymore because they're in jail, so the problem looks like it was, resolved very nicely, but really it just delayed it for a while. So some of the legal ramifications of those charges and how it's a little bit different for the homeless population. Number one, if you have a low-level charge, a lot of times you just get a summons to appear in court. And if you're homeless, and maybe that summons goes to a shelter, if that's where you were when you committed the crime, you may not be there by the time that the summons gets there. There are a lot of other, just the nature of homelessness to move, people move around within a community. A lot of times that summons will not make it to them. Then there is a failure to appear in court, which means they have an active warrant. And then if they are interacting with law enforcement again in the future and law enforcement sees that there's an active warrant, that can make a situation look a little bit different than maybe it would if that warrant wasn't there. If bail is set in a case, if it's cash bail, monetary bail, it's very likely not going to be paid, in which case the person will sit in jail for days or possibly weeks, and definitely longer than that, especially if there is a behavioral health evaluation that's ordered as part of especially supervised bail. And then if you look at it at the more serious charges and there's a sentence and someone who was previously homeless is incarcerated. When a sentence is set, there's a minimum and a maximum amount of time to be served. So when someone meets their minimum sentence, they're typically eligible for parole, but that parole won't happen without a safe home plan. So being released to the streets is not considered a safe home plan, which means people will stay in jail until there is a place for them to go or until they reach their maximum sentence, in which case you cannot hold someone longer in prison than their maximum sentence, in which case they're free to go. And sometimes that means leaving the prison and walking to the bus stop in front of the prison with a bus pass that gets you to downtown or a community that maybe you have ties to, and that's it. I mean, that's the transition from jail to the streets. We can say, we can relate it to probation too. A lot of these charges just result in a sentence to community supervision. So you have a probation officer and you have to report maybe every month or maybe every other month. And again, with a very transient population, you're probably going to have missed appointments with your probation officer.
which leads to a violation, which is another reason that you could end up in jail, not because you committed any new offense, but simply because you weren't able to keep up with the requirements the justice system placed on you. While, I mean, this is true for all individuals, jail can be a destabilizing experience for a lot of people. And if someone is already experiencing housing instability, it's even more so. If healthcare was established in the community prior to the jail stay, you do receive healthcare in prison, but it's a disruption to what you were experiencing in the community. You have probably lost the possessions that you did have. You may have lost your identification. If you were in a shelter, you lost your spot at the shelter. And if it's a time like now, then the shelter fills up and you've lost that spot for the long term. The same is true of waiting lists for shelters and housing. So it's this really, there are a lot of chances for something relatively simple to spiral up into increasing involvement with the justice system. And it's very ironic in some ways because people, like, they do have a right to be homeless. There is no requirement that you have a home. It's just living that life tends to lead people to a lot of interactions with the justice system. So I wanted to take just another minute, I think I'm running a little bit long, but talk about a specific, a situation that I've become acquainted with over the last couple of weeks. It's the story of a young woman. I'm going to call her Nora, that's not her real name. She's about 25 years old. And in November of 2019, I'm not sure who called it in, but Nora was asleep in a parking lot late at night in York City. And someone observed the situation and called the city police, who responded. And it turns out Nora was not only asleep, she was very heavily intoxicated. And when the police woke her up, she did not respond well to that and ended up fighting back, both officers, in a pretty committed way. And so she ended up with an aggravated assault charge. Actually 2 charges because of the 2 officers. And that's a felony charge. That's a very serious charge to be facing. And so with just that information, that tends to lead to, you can take a judgmental view of that. You can take a very judgmental view of that. But especially today, I kind of did a deep dive into Nora's history and found out that she had been experiencing fairly severe mental illness since about 14, and had been experimenting with a variety of drug use, essentially self-medicating her mental struggles since about the age of 17. She had kind of multiple instances of erratic behavior. As I looked through kind of the 5 years, of her experiences that I did, it turned, early on, she had a very supportive relationship with her mother. She was staying with her mother. By the end, it's a toxic relationship. The supports aren't there. My mom won't let me stay with her anymore. So she had, experiences to the level that it was, straining family relationships. And like I mentioned before, justice involvement can be very destabilizing. And, I don't know, and I can't prove that what happened in November of 19 caused anything directly, but she did spend a month in jail for that assault charge. And then early in 2020, it's the first time in her history that she's showing up at shelters. Her mom wouldn't let her stay at the house anymore. She's living in a car, she's living in shelter. And I think it just all goes to show that what we see in a quick snapshot, say either walking down the street or driving by a block, is just a very small snippet, of what an individual is experiencing and who they are and what's involved in their story. And we talked earlier, not all homeless people are mentally ill. It can be fairly common with the chronically homeless population, and Nora is an example of that. So I'm going to wrap up now, but just kind of take all of that and think on it and think again, just how a little bit of justice involvement, we call justice involvement Velcro. Like once you have a little bit of it, everything sticks to you.
It's really accurate.
Yeah. Oh, the transition, yeah.
That's okay, that's okay.
Lost it.
Okay. So on the other side of that, you think to yourself, okay, well, the three of us are sitting here, we're all involved in this work, but how does that happen? How are groups working together, right? So I work with the York County Coalition on Homelessness. We are a group of service providers, but also community advocates and just involved folks that have been through some of our housing programs are part of our groups. People that have experienced homelessness in other avenues or other communities are part of our group. We bring them all together. We try to collaborate. We try to make sure that we are not duplicating service, but instead we are filling gaps in service as best we can. We know really clearly that there are not enough services to meet the full need. And being perfectly honest with you, that was the answer even pre-pandemic. And with this influx we've seen over the last 2 years, it is even more clear now than it ever was before. But how can we use the resources we do have to serve as many people as we can and to make sure that we're serving them in a way that we're setting them up for success whenever possible? So how can we help folks to achieve stable housing, but not just achieve it, but be able to maintain it with assistance from the community, or in some cases, once they feel like they are stable enough without assistance, knowing that they can come back, they can seek assistance if something happens and they feel they need that support. So the coalition's goal is to really bring people together and to work on those problems. We do that through advocacy, we do it through presentations like this one, but we also do it through small subcommittees that focus on individual topics. So topics like youth homelessness, topics like emergency shelter and street outreach, topics like making sure that rental assistance providers in the community are getting together on a pretty regular basis and talking to one another, brainstorming solutions to challenges that they're seeing in the rental market. So that's kind of the work that the coalition does to bring these service providers, other organizations, other groups together so that we're working together, we're familiar with each other, and that we're friends, really, and that we can reach out to each other when we're stuck on a situation to see what options are available. There is a lot of reality tied to the resources that we have. And I mean that in, we don't receive as a community a large pot of money from the federal government. The federal government says, do whatever you need to do to help your homeless population. It is never that easy. There are always strings attached. There are always parameters that have to be adhered to when you're talking about public government funding. The bulk of our funding is federal, which is why I refer to the federal, but there are some funding through state, there's some funding through other channels, but they all have very narrow parameters around what you can do. So you get a pot of money to assist those folks who are experiencing homelessness, but it doesn't always line up exactly with what you actually need to help the people in your community experiencing homelessness. So what you find are a group of people through the coalition and otherwise that are trying to creatively use the dollars we have available to serve as many people as we can, but acknowledging that there are whole groups of people experiencing homelessness that those dollars don't allow us to support. And that's hard. That is very hard. Because there are a large number of people who need that support that just don't meet the eligibility criteria, so that we're unable to assist them financially, we're unable to assist them with certain case management programs because of that. The homeless definition, when you talk about the federal government, the homeless definition that we use through the US Department of Housing and Urban Development is incredibly narrow. So someone who is homeless, per the federal government through HUD, is staying in a place not meant for habitation. Robin talked about that earlier. This is really outdoors, a car, camping, a tent, It can even be a building or a camper that is not hooked up to utilities. Those are all considered places not meant for human habitation. So you can be in a place not meant for human habitation. You can be in an emergency shelter. You could be in a hotel, but only if a charitable organization, a social service agency, the Red Cross, Salvation Army, a local church is paying for that stay. If a friend or family member is paying your stay, if you are paying your stay, the federal government says you're not homeless. If you are staying with someone, you are not considered homeless, even though you don't have a home of your own by the federal government. This makes it really hard to help people. There aren't enough shelter opportunities for everyone, so naturally people go stay with someone or they go pay for a hotel, thereby making themselves ineligible for the assistance that we can't provide. It is very frustrating. But I always try to share with everyone that there is a reason and a rationale for that very narrow definition. It is still hard to work with it, but the rationale for that narrow definition is that the federal government dollars are saying to communities, look, we want you to focus on helping those who need it most. And we're saying, but if I'm staying with someone, I need it too. And the government says, we know that these dollars for the homeless crisis response system are really earmarked for people who have no other options. You no longer have family or friends that you can stay with. Nora, whose mom, she can't take it anymore. She is not allowed to stay there anymore. Nora no longer has a familiar support system to help her. So the federal government says people that don't have a support system and don't have the ability through employment or other income to pay for a stay at a hotel, to pay for somewhere to go, those are the people we want you to focus on. And so we do, but we know that there's a large number of people that still need our help that we can't help. And we know that there are people who really do need our help that are bouncing back and forth into bad situations that make them doubled up or make them self-paying a hotel because they have nowhere else to go and their option is to be outside. But continually bouncing between those different housing or non-housing situations means that it makes it challenging for us to be able to assist them. It's very frustrating, but it is the parameters within a lot of our work. So it's not that we don't want to help. So if you call my office or you call one of our service providers and you say, look, somebody is staying with me, but they can't stay anymore, we're going to refer to shelters. We're going to talk about the street outreach team because we don't have the option from our funders to be able to support there. So it's challenging for us. And we know it's challenging for those that want to refer to the homeless crisis response system as well. There is a silver lining to all of the collaboration despite the restrictions. So we all know the restrictions. So now we've begun to meet with other groups and say, how can we work around these restrictions? What other opportunities do we have for funding or for program support that would allow us to help these folks who clearly need our help, but don't meet this very narrow definition? So from those conversations, the Coalition on Homelessness has been able to form a lot of partnerships. We have a partnership with CARD. We have a partnership with the York County Reentry Coalition. We have partnerships with the York County Opioid Collaborative and with the Healthy York Coalition as well. So we are bringing together already collaborative groups and collaborating amongst ourselves to try to problem solve ways to fill these gaps that we are so keenly aware exist in our system. Because the reality is we're all touching a lot of the same people. There are people that are experiencing homelessness that are involved with opioid crisis. There are people that are experiencing homelessness that are heavily involved in our health systems, and the health systems are saying, what can we do to stabilize this person? They keep coming back to us for service, and we just aren't solving the problem. There are people that are involved in reentry that have options that would be far safer and far less traumatic for them if we could find a way to serve them. So we are, as a community, trying to pull everyone together, trying to look at opportunities for ways to do that work, to tap into different resources that allow us to expand our opportunities outside of that very narrow homeless definition to help more people. So I'm gonna ask Amy to talk a little bit about what our plans are moving forward around that collaboration.
Well, I'll start by just noting that in August of this year, a lot of the circumstances that we've talked about this evening with the increasing numbers of homelessness and increasing visibility of homelessness, especially here in York City, led to a meeting of the minds, I guess, so to speak, between the folks that are here tonight. But through our coalition connections, we're also able to pull in people from the district attorney's office, from county human services, which includes department, from the reentry coalition. I'm probably missing some because there's a lot of people at that table.
Health systems.
Health systems
Sorry.
were there, absolutely. And what formed was, we didn't know what we had at first, but it has become an ad hoc health, justice, and housing working group. Who, when I was talking about how people who are homeless can become justice involved, you know, I mentioned that the type of response can determine whether or not the act was ultimately seen as criminal. And one of the things that we have looked at doing is building that team response so that when situations arise that are better resolved through intervention with services, that can happen. When there are situations that are a threat to public safety, then law enforcement has that clear picture and can address it, but also has those connections to service providers in their back pocket, you know, as they just go throughout their day-to-day work. One of the things that we realized fairly quickly, though, one of our first two sessions were needs identification. Like, what in a perfect world would it take to meet all of the needs that we're seeing? And we pretty quickly realized that a lot of what we need doesn't currently exist.
Or it exists in a capacity that is too limited to be able to support the numbers we're talking about.
And so there are, you know, a lot of long-term goals, but we feel that we're much more likely to meet them if you have three major systems pulling from their resources and also advocating for how important these services are. So just to give you a peek of kind of the things that we were talking about or are going to push towards. First of all, access to healthcare is huge because, you know, Kelly kind of gave us a hint already that a lot of people who are homeless do have health needs, you know, as much as anyone in any living situation does, and then sometimes more because they are living in rough conditions, you know. So street medicine, you know, actually having medical care providers who go to homeless individuals where they're at, we don't have that currently. We are working to get that, and
We're doing it in a very limited capacity.
Mom medicine.
Mom medicine.
Mom medicine. But we're looking for nursing and doctor care to go along with
there's also a lot of people who are released from the hospital. You know, they have housing instability and are released from the hospital, and there's no level of care that kind of steps them down from the hospital back to kind of their regular life, which may be on the streets, and so they're experiencing cycles of being in and out of the hospital when if there were say a longer term step down, like a 6 to 12 months option, we would probably see a lot better outcomes from that population. Behavioral health is a big piece of the puzzle. And I want to take a minute to just give a shout out to the START clinic. That's the specialized treatment and recovery team. It's where we're sitting right now. I work for the county probation department, but my office is in a health clinic, and there are probation officers and pretrial officers and mental health case managers who all work out of this behavioral health clinic and are able to connect people to care, sometimes same day, usually within a week. That's an amazing resource, and we're talking about how to make those connections even stronger for homeless individuals. You know, another part of this kind of the behavioral health equivalent to street medicine is mental health co-responders. And these are new to York County. We've got 4 now. They've all started since July of this year, and they are mental health professionals. Most of them are former crisis workers who are embedded in local police departments. And so they are able to work with individuals where they're at, connect them to resources that are local to them. And so that's something very exciting. You know, of all the things that we need that we don't have, this is something that we need that we do have, and that we're getting more of them as over the next year or so. Some other needs that are very important are safe places to be, and this is both during the day because most, if not all, shelters do not allow you to stay on site during the day. I think that's something I didn't realize coming, you know, when I was new to this work. I was like, oh, wait, what? You know, so
Traditionally, if you're in an emergency shelter, you're expected to not be in emergency shelter during the day.
and so, you know, again, people that are hanging out, sometimes, you know, it's not the, you know, that is literally the only place they have to be. There's also, we're challenging ourselves to rethink what safe spaces might look like, especially for overnight stays. There are far more people living in cars since the pandemic, so can we do safe parking spaces? There are a lot of other models that other communities have implemented, and York is, we're still in the planning phase, or the wish list phase for a lot of that. There is a push for community ambassadors. There are the group violence intervention program in the city relies on credible messengers, which are people who have kind of been there and done that and lived the experience, and are able to work with people informally towards resolution. And that model honestly offers a lot of promise for working with homeless individuals. You know, if there is someone who's not a law enforcement officer, who has lived experience, who's been homeless themselves, and can just go out and talk to people and probably make a connection that nobody else would be able to make in that situation. And a lot of the issues, you know, quote unquote, that we're seeing could go away just by better communication. We've also talked about basic resource access. You know, so that's things like water, but that's also things like bathrooms and even charging stations, because the electronics are really a lifeline.
Absolutely.
Like absolute lifeline for a lot of people, and that also contributes to some of the loitering, is they want to be by an outlet until they're charged up. And so, not that there needs to be, you know, a giant wall of electrical outlets somewhere, but can we have these resources dispersed throughout the community in places so that everyone can access them? You know, it doesn't overwhelm any one service provider. And so, say most of these things are longer term goals, admittedly. The team response model, I think, is something that we can do relatively in a relatively straightforward manner. So hopefully we'll have some positive updates for you all on that, even just in the next couple of months.
I think, I was just gonna say, I think it's important to note that even though the origin of that group and the things that we're looking to tackle, it started in New York City, I think it's really important to note that we're not looking for these solutions to only be city focused. We know that these are challenges that people experience all across York County, and we are looking for models that will allow us to provide those options in all the communities that we serve. Now, are we going to be able to build emergency shelters all over York County? Probably not. But if we can work with existing partners in those different areas to make sure that there are some opportunities available that allow people to be stable, that allow them to be connected, to give them a place to go during the day, those go a long way, as do things like the safe parking that Amy mentioned. Safe parking is ideally more than just a parking lot. It is connected to restroom facilities or laundry and shower facilities where people can still access those basic amenities. I think it's really important to note that, do we think this is the best solution? No. Obviously, the best solution is that everyone has a home. We are absolutely working on those things. But they are all long-term plans and they are all long-term goals. And we know that there aren't enough housing dollars to house everyone. So how can we look at all of our creative solutions to keep people safe where they are and to be able to move them on to another opportunity as that opportunity presents itself, as that person is ready to move on to that opportunity. So anyway, it's my soapbox.
And we all have our soapboxes.
And we all do.
So I wanted to wrap up this part of the conversation this evening by handing it off to Robin, because I know Robin does a lot of work on the streets and has seen a lot of this need firsthand, and also has just very recently had an experience that illustrates a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of the value of collaboration.
Right. So it was probably about a month ago, our team got called to City Hall. There was a person that was there, unsheltered, having some mental health issues. And probably 5 or 6 organizations worked together, trying to assess the situation. This person had, was from New York and actually was on a list, had housing in New York, had family. So one of the things our organization started to do we realized people were here and they were stuck here, but they had a home base. So we started to provide Greyhound tickets to get people back to their connections. So as we're working with this person, we were able to Greyhound her to New York the following day. But there were no other services. Where could she go? It was like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Where was she gonna stay that night? There was no space in shelter. So even though we were all collaboratively working together,
There was still nowhere to go.
there was still nowhere to go. And so then we were able, because of our partnership, okay, what can we do? So we can get her on the bus tomorrow. We can meet her at the bus station, get her ticket, make sure she's got numbers, food, whatever she needs. But we work well together, we do, but we're still faced with the gaps that we're addressing, but they're still there.
Yeah, the gaps are the challenge. I just want to give kudos to Robin's voice for keeping up. We tried to give her a break in there so that we wouldn't make it worse. I do want to talk really briefly. Your voice is going, so I'm going to do my own.
You do your own intro.
I do want to talk really briefly about help versus harm and also ways to help, because I know when we do these presentations, there's always a lot of conversation around, well, what can I do? So I'm going to share a couple of links in the chat. That's what I was leaning forward to do if you saw me a few minutes ago. The coalition does have a Facebook page. We do share some information there, so I'm going to include that in the chat for you. And I'm also going to include a link to a helping document. We weren't sure what to call it, but it is effectively kind of a brief list of what your shelter options are in York County, who to contact if you're looking for permanent housing options. There is a little bit of information on there about if you're already housed and you're behind on your rent, how we can keep you housed, or service providers that can assist with that. And then we talk about ways to help and help versus harm in that same document. So ways to help. We know from our work that there is just it's like a human nature drive to give materials. So what I mean by that is you'll hear an organization say, you can donate to our organization, even $10 goes a long way. There's often a hesitation on the part of a lot of people to provide monetary donation. They want to provide socks, or they want to provide hot hands, the little packs you can put in your gloves and stuff to keep your hands and feet warm. They want to provide material goods. So what we say is the biggest reason service organizations ask for monetary donations is simply because they have experience and knowledge about the very specific material goods that they need in their spaces. And so it's not that they want to use the funding for something administrative or anything. They just want to make sure that the donations that they're getting are exactly what they need to support their populations the way they need to be supported. So I will encourage monetary donation to service providers in our community. However, if you are someone who prefers a material donation, my second soapbox of the night is to really focus on what the organization needs. A lot of organizations on their websites will include a wish list. They will include their most desired items. Go by those lists. So if you are individually donating, if you have a social group or a church that wants to do that work, seek out those lists, because those lists will provide the materials that they can't get themselves, either through funding or they just don't have the means, the resources to do that. But it allows you to collect a material good, to donate a material good. A lot of our organizations also rely heavily on volunteers in a lot of capacity. If volunteerism is something you're interested in, approach them and ask about that. We provide on the helping document a brief list. It is by no means fully inclusive of all of the organizations in York County doing good work, but a bulk of them that do a lot of work with homeless populations all over the county. Please, seek out that information from them. If they don't have a list on their website, I can promise you they have a list. They have a list. You might have to call their main number and ask, but I can promise you that they have really specific things that they're looking to get from the greater community. So I encourage participation. It can be an individual, it can be a group, it doesn't have to be anything grandiose. If you can provide paper towels to an emergency shelter, they will love you for it. If you can provide cases of water to an emergency shelter, they will love you for it. So it doesn't have to be big, but it does have to be appropriately focused. So the other piece of that then is the help versus harm conversation. The coalition released a help versus harm graphic a couple of months ago. It's on our Facebook page, so if you go there, you'll see it. It's also included in the helping document about ways to help. Another thing we hear a lot is people want to physically help. So we get requests from parents that want their children to go out and to physically hand socks to someone who needs socks. And I appreciate the intent behind that, but the reality is that is not always an appropriate way to make sure that people get the resources they need. Similarly, people going out on their own and providing boxes of food that maybe aren't completely appropriate types of food for someone who is living outdoors. Maybe they're giving large bags of clothing. We've even seen mattresses. Those types of donations would be better focused to organizations that can distribute the appropriate need of that individual, rather than just here's a bag of clothing. I don't know if it'll fit you or not, but here it is. Or here's a box. Something we see actually a lot is raw meats or canned goods that require can openers or things of that nature. Those types of donations directly to a group of people staying outside are more challenging, and they actually create more trash in our communities because people, whatever they can't use, they will typically leave. So I encourage the participation of making sure people have food, making sure people have clothing, making sure people have access to shelter and to resources. But think about how you do it. Think about going through a service organization instead of making those donations directly to groups that you're seeing. Likely people you are seeing are connected to services. We are just limited in being able to provide pulling people into shelter. We also have some people that are uncomfortable with our shelter spaces and don't want to be in those spaces. So when you're looking to give, I really strongly encourage working with the professional organizations that do this work and that have the knowledge base for how you can best really support the people that are out there that need that support. That being said, I mentioned that my list is nowhere near comprehensive. I tried to cover kind of all the different areas of York County. But I always encourage the use of 211. 211 is always going to have the most updated information on service providers, what they're providing, which one is closest to you, what the best one is to offer donations to. That includes food pantries and food banks too, that are all over York County. They'll help you find a service provider that's near you that can help. So I always encourage the use of that, but we wanted to give some direct options as well. So we did that on that document. We don't typically provide paper resource guides. And the biggest reason is that the resources change. They fluctuate throughout the year on who has what available and what might be an opportunity. But for this group, I really wanted there to be something. So we put together that sheet in order to share with you, just kind of as a starting point. I will also say, you can message us on Facebook if you aren't sure where to go or who to donate to or how to help. We will help connect you as well to organizations that meet the mission of what you're trying to fulfill. And I also encourage you to talk to faith partners in your communities. A lot of times faith partners have programming and support, but they don't advertise it as a social service agency would because their support is limited based on what their congregation can support. So if you have churches or synagogues or mosques in your community, they may also have programming too that they're doing that you can step in and assist with. So that's a lot of talking. Yeah, I'm starting to feel like Robin here. But I think that's kind of all we wanted to cover. We tried to cover a broad scope of things. Ladies, anything we missed?
I'm gonna see if I can get this help. I wanna tag on to the help versus harm. A lot of times, the more items people have, it draws attention. And then that gets people moved or it gets wet. And so we just had a situation just the other day where an encampment had to move. And they had a lot of stuff. But when people are given things, some of the things that people tell us is to tell people, not if they're gonna offer it, we're gonna take it. We feel bad. And left over in this one spot were more than 20 coats and bags of clothes that now they're thrown away. And we see that a lot because people can't carry it, so it gets left. And so that which draws attention and gets people moved. So it definitely is a harm if somebody's got a stable place to stay. So just, something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I will make my closing remarks with my own little soapbox, which is just that, and having looked at some of the registrants this evening, I know that there are a lot of people who are service providers who are listening to our conversation this evening. And I know that just kind of having bridged both worlds for a while now, a lot of folks who are in the nonprofit world or outside of the criminal justice system see the agencies that are in the judicial center as very opaque or very formal or very strict or structured.
They're intimidating.
They're okay. You said it. They're intimidating. And my experience, though, has been quite the opposite. They are looking for ways to help the people that are interacting with the justice system. And so if you are a service provider and you are working with someone who is on the streets or is in a situation where their housing is unsafe or unstable, and they have a probation officer or they have a public defender or even I'm gonna say it, a prosecutor. Like, I track those people down and reach out to them, and they are absolutely willing to do what they can to make sure that the outcome that we're getting out of people going through the justice system is going to keep them from coming back into the justice system. So that's my soapbox. I'll put it away now. I think we're going to turn it over to questions from George and or the audience now, I believe.
if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or the Q&A. But in the meantime, I do have a question for our panelists. If I were to suspect that someone were homeless, or someone approached me and told me that they were homeless, what would be the best course of action that I could take?
It's done.
So I would, well, I would recommend if you feel like they are likely outdoors, I would always recommend, the Friends and Neighbors hotline. It is on the helping document. Friends and Neighbors does not provide shelter, but they do provide survival gear. So trying to keep people as safe as we can. The next thing I would likely provide the Bell Socialization Next Door program, which is also on that list, as kind of a one-stop conversation. Now, the Bell Next Door program is located in York City, but we do serve the full county. We may not be able to provide shelter if someone is unwilling to leave an area of the county where we don't have shelter. But the Bell Next Door program will talk to them about their shelter options if they are willing to go to one of those areas. But also they will be able to have a conversation with them about having a housing assessment, which would allow them opportunities for permanent housing. The other thing I will say is if someone has a phone, that is fantastic. If they don't have a phone, we always try to problem solve. Do they have someone whose phone number that they would be willing to give? Do they have an email address that they might be able to check at a library? We're pulling in the library system. So do they have some way that we can communicate with them? But Friends and Neighbors also has supported people in making sure that they have phone access. So they are a great one to start with. They will also do some connections to shelter. They will do connections to Bell Next Door. They'll have conversations about whether or not it's appropriate to help them get back to a support network that might be somewhere else.
Thank you.
That's good. One of the things that we do is, you know, when someone calls, we are gonna try to connect them to the services. And because we collaborate and partner with these groups, if they need a phone, we do that sometimes with Bell Next Door. They're working with someone that they really need to be able to connect with. And so they'll reach out and we'll do that.
That is the only question that I had,
That's okay.
and I do not see any in chat. So I guess you ladies were quite well spoken and just answered everybody's questions during the presentation.
Should we put our email addresses in the chat so that people will see that long after they'll have the recording? Would that be helpful?
I'm not sure it'll show up in the recording, but if you put it in there, I can make sure that it gets shared.
You get to see me reach for the keyboard, right? All right, there is me, Kelly, because obviously I know mine better than the others, right? You're gonna do AS. I remember that one from when I worked for the county. That's Amy. Pardon the typing, and Robin's. Should have thought this through a bit earlier. All be patient. You're a mess maker.
You got it.
There's Robin. Woo.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Well,
Yes, let us know how we can help, even if you're stuck. I get lots of calls from people in the community who say, I saw this situation happening, I don't know what to do, can you help me? And so I will guide people through situations wherever I can.
thank you. I would like to thank the three of you for serving as our panelists tonight. And I would also like to thank those of you who attended live for our presentation and who made this a wonderful event for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.